deeply complex individual, constantly learning in order to better himself. And now faces the challenge he has been preparing for his entire life.
3 cheers for His Majesty, the King, and Her Majesty, the Queen! Hep hep! Hep hep! Hep hep!
Well, he was a very studious child. I mean, he was somebody who was quite unlike Prince Philip, who was a much more boisterous character. He was unlike his mother as well. His mother was somebody who was very serious from a very young age, and Charles, I think, inherited this seriousness, but what he had, which she didn't have, was a real interest in learning and a real interest in books and things like that.
Well, Queen Elizabeth was a very dutiful mother. If you think that she became Queen aged 25, you know, Prince Charles was, I think he was 4 when the Queen was crowned. She just didn't have time to be with them. But that was how aristocratic families worked.
When the coronation took place in 1953, it was quite interesting because Charles was obviously just about old enough to be at the coronation and to have an understanding of what was going on in a way that none of his siblings who were currently born did. And I suspect that for a very young boy, it would have been an overwhelming experience. I mean, the pageantry, the noise, the sheer number of people. But it would also have been, probably by then, in the back of his mind, this thought percolating about, this is all going to happen for me.
It was a 3-hour ceremony, and the ceremony itself was very, very serious and very religious and very dramatic.
Well, obviously he was the eldest sibling of 4, and I think it's fair to say that because he was the first sibling, and because he was going to be Prince of Wales and then eventually was going to become king, there was always a sense that he was the one who was given the most attention and the most focus.
Of the school. Now there's one new boy still to arrive, and here he comes with his mother and father. The headmaster receives the royal party. Prince Philip was a pupil here. His son looks happy to be following in father's footsteps.
Well, Charles was sent to public school in Scotland at Gordonston, which is an infamously tough school where essentially the attitude is spare the rod and spoil the child. And Charles hadn't wanted to go to Gordonston, but Prince Philip, who had also been to Gordonston, saw this as an opportunity to make his son a man. And Prince Philip, who was a very traditional, very old-fashioned man, essentially believed that his son would benefit from this kind of education. And of course he didn't, because what happened at Gordonston, which he later described as caudits in kilts, was that it made Charles embittered, it made him, I think, somebody quite closed in terms of his emotions, because he had to keep so much to himself. It was also a very traumatic time for him, and I think a lot of the issues that arose later in his life all come back to his school days.
The great court of Trinity College, Cambridge, and the royal procession arrives. The first Prince of Wales to attend the university for 100 years, he'll be living in a room in New Court.
It was quite common before Charles for monarchs to go up to Oxford or Cambridge. I mean, most people went to university simply to acquire kind of a tick box, whereas Charles actually went to Cambridge with the intention of studying. But he had a very good time at Cambridge because I think after the privations of prep school and boarding school, he found people he was comfortable with, he found an academic environment that he enjoyed. So I think you can say that Cambridge was in many respects the making of Prince Charles, and then of course when he became King Charles, he's still been somebody who's had very strong links to his old university.
His investiture was obviously quite a big thing. It was obviously broadcast, televised, which would be a first. From that, I wouldn't say from that day forward, but probably even before then, the kind of the training and the preparation of one day becoming king began.
Mae'ch ynerchiad wedi fy nghyffwrdd yn ddwys, a gallaf eich sicrhau fy mod wedi cymryd sylwi o'r gobeithion am lygwyd anddyn nhw.
Prince Charles stepped out from the Fleet Air Arms headquarters at Yeovilton in Somerset today in perfect flying weather for his first hour's instruction at the controls of a Wessex Mark V helicopter.
It's been traditional that any male member of a royal family would be expected to spend time in the army, And Charles was not an obvious fit to spend time in the armed forces, but the fact that he served in the RAF for several years in the 1970s was an indication that, first of all, he could put his mind to something like this. And I think that it was actually probably a character-forming experience for him, because it did give him a sense of working with the armed forces, and that's something that he's had a lifelong respect for. So, while it's fair to say that Charles was not the most distinguished member of the RAF has ever been, it was certainly an important time for him. He found himself mixing with his men on much more equal terms than he ever had been able to when he was at school. It was certainly an important time for him, and something that I think affected and led to the man that he's become. Well, Charles's great uncle, Lord Mountbatten, apparently once said to him that it was important for him to sow his wild oats before he got married. There was a real sense with Charles that he was expected to have a bachelor life. His father had not had much of a bachelor life. I mean, he'd had girlfriends, but he had no serious relationships before he married Princess Elizabeth. And on the one hand, he wasn't necessarily the most outgoing of men. He wasn't necessarily somebody who was going to be a lady killer. But on the other hand, he was a Prince of Wales. There was no shortage of people who would have married him. Well, he met Lady Diana Spencer in 1977 because he'd actually been dating her elder sister Sarah for a while. And when he first met Diana, she was 16. And it was an unequal relationship because she was still a girl. And of course, at this stage, Charles was still seeing Camilla Shand, who later became Camilla Parker Bowles. So I think it's fair to say that on the one hand, the relationship with Diana was not necessarily an obvious love match from the beginning. And she was somebody, perhaps because of her youth, who was not fazed by responsibilities that she'd have to take on if she became Princess of Wales.
She now faced possibly the most daunting initiation test for would-be members of the royal family, ordeal by the media. Her flat came under siege. She was followed wherever she went.
Yesterday you were a nanny looking after children. Now you're about to marry the Prince of Wales, and one day you would, in all likelihood, be Queen. It's a tremendous change for someone, if I may say, of 19 to make all of a sudden, the transition.
It is, but I've had a small run up to it all in the last 6 months. And next to Prince Charles, I know I can't go wrong. He's there with me.
When Charles and Diana were asked in their engagement interview if they were in love, she replied, of course, and Charles more or less shrugged and said,
whatever in love means.
It was the worst possible thing he could have said, because for decades afterwards, that has been taken to mean he doesn't love Diana, he's doing this because he feels he has to, he's been forced into it, he couldn't care less, she could be anyone. And I think that a lot of the public ill will towards Charles comes about because it was felt he wasn't in love with Diana, and that response, I think, has led to a lot of it. The royal wedding was by far the biggest event for the royal family that there'd been since the coronation nearly 30 years before. And it was something that people were queuing up on the streets to see it. There were millions and hundreds of millions of people watching it worldwide because it was bringing glamour to the royal family. It was the idea, the famous picture of kissing on Buckingham Palace balcony, one of the most reproduced images of the royal family of the 20th century. And it was one of those days that was freighted with pageantry, freighted with pomp, and it was designed to show that Britain could still put on this kind of event that would still excite people.
Out and about, the best places are filling up, and everyone's making sure it's going to be a great day.
And I feel rather sorry for Diana, actually, because she was caught in the middle of it, and she was still so young at this stage, which is only 20 years old. And the idea of being placed in front of the world's cameras and the world's media and essentially told to perform must have been absolutely terrifying. Diana essentially epitomised the collision between the traditions of the royal family, where royal wives were supposed to say very little and to be docile, and an emerging sense in the 1980s and even more so in the 1990s that women were not prepared just to shut up and be spoken to and to sit and smile, but to actually have their own identities and their own brands. She was being seen increasingly as a fashion icon, and she wasn't sitting at home smiling and having children. And so I think that Charles was resentful of this because he didn't understand why she wasn't doing what he'd been told she was going to do. If he'd been allowed to marry Camilla in the first place, the world would have been a much happier place, but it wasn't to be. Camilla Parker Bowles was the great love of Charles's life, and he met her in the 1970s. She was a debutante. She was not from the highest aristocratic background, but she was a sort of comfortable country gentry background. She wasn't felt to be suitable as a wife for him precisely for this reason. They got on very well, they shared a similar sense of humour, similar interests, they obviously found each other very attractive, and this was, I think, one of the tragedies of the latter-day royal family, because they were having an affair up to, including, and after his marriage, and Diana must have known about it, and that must have been enormously hard for her to have been presented with this marriage that you know is to some extent a sham, because your husband's having an affair with another woman. She was not the great love of his life, Camilla was. And I think that he knew that, Camilla knew that, and Diana knew that.
Joining me now in the studio is Andrew Morton, the author of Diana, Her True Story, which brought to the public's attention the state of the royal marriage. Mr. Morton, the palace said today that no third party is involved. Can that be right?
Ostensibly no, but given the fact that the Princess of Wales believes that Prince Charles's friendship with another woman, Camilla Parker Bowles, has cast a long shadow over that marriage, must be considered when you look at the failure of this 11-year union. The fact that the Camillagate tapes, the so-called Camillagate tapes, have not yet been published remains a sword of Damocles hanging over Prince Charles's head and could fatally damage his position.
Well, in 1993, Charles and Camilla were having a conversation in which he declared he'd like to be her tampon, which was obviously something that was a fairly sexual and graphic image. And this was being recorded by accident by somebody who picked up the call when it was leaked to the papers. And at the time, it was horrendously embarrassing, because not only did it make it absolutely explicitly clear that Charles was having an affair, but also the language that he used and the choice of words and everything was just, it wasn't seen as very regal, it was seen as grubby and vulgar and all the rest of it. So I think it really hurt Charles's reputation.
Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
The Princess of Wales has agreed to Prince Charles's request for a divorce. A spokeswoman for the Princess said that Diana will continue to be involved in all decisions relating to the couple's children, and she will continue to live at Kensington Palace. The Queen had written to both Charles and Diana last December advising them to go ahead with a divorce.
It was fairly obvious that by the mid-90s there was nowhere for the marriage to go, and so the 1996 divorce was essentially an inevitability. Now, you could see it on the one hand as being a tragedy for the family that they had to get divorced, because obviously any divorce is going to be difficult for any family. But on the other hand, their unhappiness was so well known and so widely discussed that the only way you could possibly get out of that situation is to divorce. And 15 years of marriage, of which probably 10 years were unhappy and difficult, is quite something. And you can see that both wanted to lead separate lives. I mean, Charles, of course, wanted to marry Camilla, and Diana wanted to have a life that she hadn't been allowed to have. She wants to be able to go off and essentially lead a normal existence outside the royal family. Charles' reaction to Diana's death in August 1997 was absolute horror. I mean, there's no 2 ways of describing it. The mother of your children's been killed very suddenly, there's no possibility of preparing for it. He was in a state of shock, and I think all of his actions throughout that time have to be seen as epitomising Charles at his best, actually. He went to Paris straight away. He was the person who was responsible for bringing her back. He was very much somebody who was lobbying her to be given every single state funeral and all the rest of it. He took the argument, she's the mother, the future King of England, she deserves this. We have no idea what their relationship was like after their divorce. We don't know for certain if they ever met or what the correspondence was like. But certainly, I mean, it must have been the most awful shock for him, as it was for everybody else in the country. Well, Charles's marriage to Camilla in 2005 was a civil ceremony rather than a religious ceremony, and it was very much felt, I think, by everybody in the country that they'd finally managed to make each other happy. Camilla and Charles were seen together in public. She was very much acknowledged as his companion. I mean, it was quite a long time. I mean, it was 8 years between Diana's death and their marriage. I mean, he could not be accused of rushing into it.
The Queen saw the change in Camilla, and she saw her dedication to duty, and she also saw her dedication to Charles, because she so helps him, and he wants her at his side, and she will be at his side.
They've waited long enough, but tonight they emerged as a couple soon to be wed. Camilla sported a whopping diamond upon her finger, and she was clearly on a high.
Congratulations.
how you are feeling, how in particular Princes William and Harry are feeling at the prospect of the marriage.
Very happy, very pleased. Be a good day.
Prince William, can I just ask you, are you looking forward to being a witness?
Yes, very much so, definitely. As long as I don't lose the rings, I'm all right. Yeah. The one responsibility, I'm bound to do something wrong.
I remember when the engagement was announced, I was actually with the King in the morning, and then I got a phone call from London, from one of the senior members of the team, to say that the Prince and the Duchess were personally inviting me as their guest. Put the phone down, and I think I was probably phoning my family and friends to say, "You won't believe it, I'm invited to the wedding." I couldn't believe it. I remember that day so well. I was so excited, and an amazing day. It was at Windsor Castle. We were at the castle for the reception. There was a lot of laughter, a lot of fun. It was absolutely wonderful, and she's always been a support to him. She's always been absolutely wonderful.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history. Her reign lasted for 70 years, from post-war austerity and the end of empire through the expansion of the Commonwealth.
The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
The late Queen and the King were very close. Her son, she had a wonderful relationship with him, but they respected each other. I mean, he really respected his mother. He respected the fact that she was Queen and everything that stood for. It was very surreal the day after his mother's death to see the King and the Queen's Consort return to London. It was very surreal because he was returning as a king.
It must be the most extraordinary experience to walk through the gates of Buckingham Palace as king, something you've done untold times before as Prince of Wales, and to feel this invisible garment of monarchy settling over your shoulders, because you start to think to yourself, well, what am I taking on? What is this responsibility? I mean, what does the future hold for me? So Charles is somebody who knows very keenly that there are these incredibly high standards that he has to live up to, and I suppose when he walked back through Buckingham Palace he thought, right, here we go.
Her dedication and devotion as sovereign never wavered. Through times of change and progress, through times of joy and celebration, and through times of sadness and loss. In her life of service, we saw that abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress, which makes us great as nations. The affection, admiration, and respect she inspired became the hallmark of her reign. Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. That promise of lifelong service I renew to you all today.
The Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III.
I too now solemnly pledge myself, throughout the remaining time God grants me, to uphold the constitutional principles at the heart of our nation. I shall endeavour to serve you with loyalty, respect, and love, as I have throughout my life. As my heir, William, now assumes the Scottish titles which have meant so much to me. He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities for the Duchy of Cornwall, which I have undertaken for more than 5 decades. Today, I am proud to create him Prince of Wales, Tywysog Cymru, the country whose title I've been so greatly privileged to bear during so much of my life and duty. With Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations, helping to bring the marginal to the centre ground, where vital help can be given.
Charles will be the 40th monarch to be crowned at the Abbey, the latest in a lineage reaching back to 1066, but in a service with Charles' own contemporary twists.
It will be a moment that confirms the King's contract with the people, as he is called to serve them, and in the religious part of the ceremony, to serve God.
For His Majesty, the King, and Her Majesty, the Queen! Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip!
So the King served the longest apprenticeship, I think, in history as Prince of Wales, and he enjoyed being Prince of Wales. He did an amazing job. There'd never been a Prince of Wales that had more or less created it into an actual job, and that's what he did. He made it an actual job.
Well, what Charles has done throughout his life is, in addition to his conventional royal responsibilities, he's had a real interest in making a difference in the lives of younger people. And so the major thing he's known for is Prince's Trust, which is this organisation which specialises in giving out funding to disadvantaged organisations and individuals and trying to make their lives better. And the thing about the Prince's Trust is that it's a brilliant idea. He's had the public persona and the ability to actually make it work, and so it's one of those things that even people who don't like the royal family and even people who have Republican sentiments would usually agree that the Prince's Trust has been a force for good. And I think that what you can see in Charles is genuine desire to make things better for people. I mean, he genuinely is somebody who has said, I worry about the fate of my subjects. And I think that's true. I think he does. And I think that the Prince's Trust and Prince's Foundation are real concrete steps to actually helping people's lives.
So when I created the Prince's Trust in 1976 to help improve the lives of disadvantaged young people, it was because I was so acutely aware of the challenges that they faced. And over the years, some of the challenges have changed, but the overall mission of giving people self-confidence, self-esteem, and better opportunities remains the same. And in that time, we have helped over 1 million young people transform their lives, and the Prince's Trust now works in 18 countries across the Commonwealth and beyond.
I would like to take this opportunity to say to you, Charles, how proud I am of everything you have accomplished with the Trust and the way you personally have inspired this organization. It is a very great pleasure for me, therefore, to present a Royal Charter to the Prince's Trust in recognition of its outstanding achievements over nearly a quarter of a century.
I don't think anyone would ever imagined that he'd been Prince of Wales for as long as he was, but it's put him in a really good place of understanding the country and the world we're in today. So I think if you would say to me, is he the best man for the job, I think it's safe to say yes, he is.
Regardless of what lies ahead during this unprecedented time for the modern monarchy, King Charles will continue to be a shining light and an example for many. His devotion to the people and years of preparation will come to the forefront during his reign.